What makes Limp Bizkit nu metal's most hated band? Well, their history of douchebaggery is rich and iconic. After their historical Woodstock '99 performance, their reputation took a major blow. With over 220,000 people attending over the course of 4 days, major acts were seeing the performances of their careers playing to a sea of energized Gen Xers. But as Limp Bizkit took the stage, the crowd was already growing restless, and unbeknownst to the band themselves, things were about to get real bad. As the band performed and Fred Durst crowd surfed on plywood, they would gear up for their big hit Break Stuff, and Durst would prologue the performance with a call to release negative energy. By the end of the band's set, a full-scale riot was underway, with concertgoers ripping and tearing at the concert infrastructure and going on to do a whole slew of terrible things that Limp Bizkit would end up catching the blame for. People make their own choices, and the event was certainly historic, but it's a scarlet letter they were forced to wear as they continued a tumultuous career. After suddenly being dropped by the Prince of Darkness Ozzy Osbourne in a Guns N' Roses recruitment falling through, Zakk Wylde would take a treasure chest of ideas and launch Black Label Society. The project would prove that Wylde not only had the chops to be considered one of the best lead guitarists of all time, but that he was a mighty frontman for what would go on to be a big percentage of the icon's legacy. The aesthetic and branding image that the band would gravitate toward would take inspiration from biker gang culture, with the group going so far as to chapter their fanbase, and the society-dwelling motherfuckers would end up causing a bit of controversy. Not that controversial. They would be forced to cancel a show in England in 2005 after upsetting a local MC there, and in 2008 released a statement saying, quote, "BLS patches/colors are not made for riding," urging fans to steer clear of disrespecting any MC and warning them to remove their gear if they were told to do so. Quote, "We don't want to see anyone hurt." I'm curious, have any of you Black Label brothers and sisters run into any pissed off bikers? By 1988, the older half of Gen X would choose their champions, with thrash metal titans like Metallica firmly laying down a legacy of domination. The band's opening trilogy of studio records helped champion a more aggressive sound. Metallica themselves were at one of the most tumultuous points in not only their careers but in their personal lives, merely a couple years removed from the loss of Cliff Burton in a freak accident in 1986. The decision to move forward with Jason Newsted would see And Justice for All as their triumphant return to form, with the record being the perfect snapshot of the band in their prime, even if that prime was fueled by heartache and alcohol. And while it doesn't quite get the admiration of both its predecessor or follow-up record, and even with the bass guitar buried 6 feet under, it's my absolute favorite version of metal's biggest bang. As an unpaid Metallica shill, I find it tough to say exactly which record is my favorite, but personally, Justice is always in the running, and I know I'm not alone. The 1970s saw a rock and roll renaissance that would only be bested by the decade that followed it, all built on foundational bands like Deep Purple. Whether you're deep into the deep cuts or you could 100% Highway Star on Guitar Hero, you've certainly bore witness to their immense impact on rock and metal. Though the band would see many legendary lineup changes, they were active for decades, touring the world, bringing the Ritchie Blackmore best to the masses. That was until their final farewell tour in 2017, which saw the band take that legendary ride off into the sunset. Or at least that's how they marketed it. In a recent interview, Ian Gillan confessed that the whole farewell final tour thing was a joke, intended to sell tickets, with the tour titled The Long Goodbye, and with promotional material emphasizing the obvious connotations. It's a tried and tested trope and stereotype at this point, to have a band tell you, "This is it, guys. For real this time. We mean it. This is the last one. Just buy the tickets. This is it. This is the end." 11-year-old social media star shreds Metallica on national television with Dave Mustaine's guitar. For decades, reality TV has been a media giant, with one of the more popular formats basically being an overblown high school talent show. From American Idol to X Factor, they would dominate legacy media ratings, and in the modern day are chopped up and virally spread all over social media, usually to poke fun at people. However, America's Got Talent recently exploded after featuring 11-year-old Maya Neela-Kantan absolutely killing an abridged version of Master of Puppets. She wows the audience, the panel of judges, and the entire world, grinding through the contest rankings into the finals, and for the performance, chose a Dave Mustaine signature V for the job. She was humble and grateful, thanking both Metallica and Cliff Burton's family specifically for allowing her to be the first person to use Metallica on the show, indicating a level of knowledge, respect, and admiration that warms my cigarette-fueled heart. Perhaps this generation will turn out just fine. National television and social media guitar rock star 11-year-old Maya Neelakantan wowed audiences across the world in recent weeks. She seems to have a deep love of thrash metal in particular, with her ripping through Master of Puppets in front of a global mainstream audience. With fellow thrash metal giants Testament and Creator currently on their Clash of the Titans tour, shout out to Jeff Becerra and Possessed opening up for them, the band would welcome the young guitar prodigy to play on stage with them in front of a tried and true metalhead audience, a first for the talented young Maya. Her journey is being documented on social media with a massive wave of support from likely the same audience that I'm speaking to right now, and it's an awesome thing to see a young and driven talent with deep reverence and respect for this music we're all gathering around to keep alive. In a modern age of soulless trash dominating mainstream spaces, seeing Gen Alpha continue to discover heavy metal is a welcome sight. Away, Bookie. Whoa. Axl Rose and Guns N' Roses became a cultural force that few bands can even remotely be compared to. They were instant main event superstars and would maintain that status for the next few years, all while battling their demons and causing massive riots. More than once. By the end of the Use Your Illusion tour in the early 90s, much of the inner turmoil would lead to major members of the band departing as the decade progressed and go on to do their own projects like Velvet Revolver. Chinese Democracy would be announced and begin production nearly a decade before it would actually be released, with it becoming somewhat of a meme back when I was in high school. When it was finally released in 2008, it wouldn't be the second coming I think some were hoping for, but the history that took place for GNR over the course of its production could fill a high school textbook. Eventually, the Guns N' Roses that people were accustomed to would reunite and continue on, with Axl Rose's present-day reputation certainly being far quieter than his youthful counterpart. When I sit down to find and research video subjects, it can be an overwhelming task. The well of information is so deep that it can be a daunting project to select which subject I'm interested in learning about, and I could do this for the next 20 years and barely make a dent. All of the good stories surround figures like Ozzy Osbourne and Axl Rose, larger-than-life personas that seem to have a gravitational pull on them when it comes to these wild stories. These guys have ascended simply being artists and inhabit a position as an almost mythological figure, with the truth to a lot of these tales being a bit blurry, but impactful in a way that inspires people. And as much as I hate to be this guy, they're part of a dying breed as rock stars. Rock stars that enter that mythological category have slowly dwindled out as the tried and true names are reaching the end of their days if they manage to survive in the first place, and perhaps I'm simply too connected to my dad metal ways, but I don't really see any new, emerging, larger-than-life figures in rock and metal. Few icons in rock and metal can lay claim to a legacy of inspiration in quite the same way that Glenn Danzig can. Impacting icons from Metallica to Avenged Sevenfold, Danzig and the Misfits have laid down some of the most influential music in history, and despite not being a mainstream record sales juggernaut, his impact is immeasurable. Danzig has also had his hands on some of country music's most prominent figures, writing songs for both Roy Orbison and the icon Johnny Cash. Inspired by a plethora of musical genres and entertainment mediums, Danzig, being an artist at his core, would pen the song Life Fades Away for Orbison, thanks to his connections with producer Rick Rubin. And being impressed by the track and Danzig's talent for songwriting, Johnny Cash would recruit Glenn for his track 13. Both songs would take Danzig out of his normal boundaries and allow him to tell haunting stories through two of music's most powerful voices. Taylor Swift is one of the best guitarists of the last 20 years. That is, at least according to a poll taken by a UK guitar retailer. When we look back on the decades of guitar evolution, names like Chuck Berry, Eddie Van Halen, and Dimebag Darrell would come to mind personally, as rock music would be driven by iconic guitar players akin to them. There's an argument to be made with both subjective and objective factors that guitar players are the captains of the way rock music has developed, more so than even charismatic frontman or, bass players. The poll taken by the UK retailer saw names like John Five, Jim Root, and Tom DeLonge from Blink-182. And while Taylor Swift is a guitar player and her massive popularity definitely gets eyes on the instrument, I'm not sure it's enough to justify her inclusion, even with the narrow scope of just the last 2 decades, which, a reminder, is 2004 onwards, which makes me super old. I'm old.